The Smithsonian is collaborating with the National Capital Planning Commission, who is the responsible lead federal agency for the project. We will welcome you to the meeting. I'm Ann Trowbridge. I'm Associate Director for Planning at Smithsonian. The agenda for our meeting tonight is here. I will go through the presentation, and if there are questions at the end, please save your questions and we'll have a discussion at the end. We can always go back to some of these slides. This is an opportunity to comment on the project, on the alternatives that we should investigate, on the environmental factors that we should consider, and to provide other information you may have as a stakeholder. We have forms for comment. You may make comments here tonight at a meeting, and there will be additional opportunities in the future. The purpose of tonight's meeting is first to let the public know we are undertaking the project, and secondly to gather your input. There will be further opportunities for input. We will be preparing an analysis of alternatives. We will be looking at different impacts on the affected environment, and we will be conducting a parallel Section 106 consultation on the effects on historic resources. The location of the project is on the south side of the National Mall, between Jefferson Drive and Independence Avenue, and 4th Street and 7th Street. Here's a more detailed plan. You can see to the east and west are the American Indian Museum and the Hirshhorn Museum. To the south are the Department of Transportation Wilbur Wright Building and the proposed Eisenhower Memorial Site. This is our project, and I'd like to introduce Larry Barr, principal of the architect for the project, Quinn Evans, associate, who will tell you a little bit more about our project.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks, everybody, for coming. The project, in its simplest terms, is really two significant pieces of work. One is the exterior building envelope, including stone, glazing, roofing, terrace work, and then a sustainability study, which essentially is the replacement, repair of existing building systems, mechanical, electrical, fire protection, life safety. That's the principal scope of work. A little bit of history about the building. Authorized in 1958 by President Eisenhower, delayed by the Vietnam War. 1971, Congress appropriated $41 million for the project to go ahead. HOK was selected as the architect. Actually was continuing as the architect. They were selected many years prior. The design principally happened in 1972, 1973. The building was open on July 1st, 1976, in time for the bicentennial. So a tremendous rush to get finished by the date certain. A couple major elements of work were conducted within the first 15 years or so after, or 20 years after the building was open. The first was on the stone facade itself. The original joints in the stone were 1/8 of an inch thick, weren't thick enough to reseal the building. So in the mid-90s, there was a project that came back and cut those joints out to 1/4 inch. And then in the late 90s, there was another project to replace the glazing on both the skylights and the curtain wall. The fundamental reason for that was that the glass technology from the mid-70s didn't provide adequate UV protection for the artifacts in the collection. So there was significant harm to those objects as part of the collection because of the glazing. The building contributes to the National Mall, National Register Historic District. It sits directly across from the west wing of the National Gallery, and it's important to note that throughout the design process. There was a significant amount of concern and encouragement for HOK to be respectful, pay attention, take design clues from the west wing of the National Gallery. The buildings are axial, they're the same material. Even though they're were quarried at different times, it is the same stone. The Tennessee pink marble is also the same stone as on the east wing. So if you walk over there and take a look, you can see that the east wing and Air and Space, because they were quarried near the same time period, are similar stones. In their appearance, the striations are pronounced the same in each. When you look at the west wing, you can see that's a little bit more subdued because it was quarried some 45 years sooner. The other point to make about the stone facade is that it is the primary barrier, environmental barrier. There is no backup wall system, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And just a final note on the mechanical system, that they do date to the building's original construction. Just a little bit of facts and figures. It's a big building, 2 football fields long, 2 football fields wide. When we start talking about quantities of material, whatever the material it is, they're pretty significant. We're looking at roughly 150,000 square feet of stone cladding. We're looking at 50,000 square feet of curtain wall, 50,000 square feet of skylights. So when we're talking about the work on the building, it is fairly substantial, just given the sheer size of the building. One of the first orders of business was really to take a close look at the building facade, the stone, and how it was behaving. When you look at this slide, color is bad. Anything with color is a stone that has some serious conditions, conditions that we're concerned about. The percentages speak for themselves up there, but there are a number of stones where we've got horizontal cracking that those stones are in distress and need immediate attention. We've got a significant percentage where the stone is warped. That's important because the existing stone is 1.25 inches thick. There are pins that hold the stones in plane, and when that stone starts to warp, there's not a lot of bite there on the stone. So anything above the 1/4 inch bowing is problematic. You can, if you walk close to the building on almost any plane, any surface, you can start to look up at the building and you can see the cuppage on the stone as it goes up in the building. So a significant problem. This is what it looks like. This is a simplified version of the detail. I'm going to start with number 2. That's the stone. The stone is 1.25 inches thick, which by today's standards, you would never put marble on a building 1.25 inches thick. You'd probably be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3 inches thick. I should go back and say, too, that Tennessee pink marble is really a limestone. So it's even a little bit, has less strength than a marble would. The other interesting thing is on the back side of this marble is 1 inch of spray foam insulation. You would never today, if you were designing a wall system, adhere any kind of insulation to the backside of stone. It prevents the backside of the stone from breathing. Number 1 is probably the element that saved everything, in that it's typically a 2-foot 2-inch airspace. There is no structure other than girts that the marble is hung from. 4 is the interior fire partition, which is roughly, again, 2.5 feet from the outside of the building. There is no continuous moisture barrier, no continuous vapor barrier. A lot of environmental concern there. 1 is a return air plenum. It is the return air system for the building, which we think in the end, because you always had that constant air moving through it, kept that space dried out, kept it free from mold, and did actually some good things. Once we got a handle on the condition of the stone, we went through an extensive stone testing program. The upshot of the stone testing program is that by and large, most of the stone tested on the facade is on a steady decline and has a limited lifespan left. Whether that's 10, 20, 30 years is dependent on where the stone is. The quality of the stone varied widely from place to place, but in the end, the stone is not in good condition and continues to deteriorate. At about that time, the determination was made that there really was not a way to save the existing stone on the building. So it becomes, instead of a stone repair project, a stone replacement project. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we're talking about what we're doing. Multiple cladding options were explored, and again, we'll have a little bit more detail in a few slides later. We have some new code requirements, new standards that we need to meet, blast being one, seismic being a second, wind being a third. Those all have impact on what we're doing with the frame and what we're doing with the finish. This is a mock-up of the existing panel, so you can start to see how tight everything is. We get asked these questions a lot as we talk about the project. I think just a comparison with the east wing, or the east building of the National Gallery in Air and Space, because the east wing just went through a project. It wasn't a recladding project, but it was a repair of the existing cladding. They opened a couple of years later than we did. Size-wise, it's roughly the same from the standpoint of how much marble panel. The key difference, I think, is that while it's the same stone, their stone was 3 inches thick and it was mounted on a CMU backup wall. Again, our stone has got 1.5 inch of spray foam insulation to the back side of it and hung on metal girts. So that's the principal difference between the two, and it's a significant difference. You're up.
We recently completed a master plan for all of Air and Space's facilities, including the National Mall building. This project to revitalize the building systems and envelope was our first project in our 20-year implementation plan. Another future project, probably 10 years out, will be replacement of the restaurant wing with a 2-story wing that has a restaurant of similar size at the ground floor, a second-floor education space with an educational planetarium, and access to an observatory. That observatory now sits out here on the terrace on the south side. And also, as part of that project, we will be revitalizing the underground loading dock that sits beneath this area, and which needs some improvement to handle the current size trucks and the type of restaurant we now have in the building. There are 2 other pieces of our master plan that we are looking at right now, potentially including as part of this project, because they will be impacted by this envelope project. First of all, the building, as you know, you enter a vestibule and then are immediately inside the gallery, our main gallery, Milestones of Flight, which has all of the best stuff in it, is currently also includes the security experience as well. And we'd like to move more of that security back out of the building, both to improve the visitor experience inside, but also to make sure that if we have weapons or whatnot, contraband coming in, that it's detected and dealt with before someone is actually in the space. So new vestibules may also be made a part of the project. We will be exploring alternative designs for that as part of this process. And also, because about 2/3 of this terrace area is actually the roof of the parking garage below, it forms part of the exterior envelope. Its membrane is in bad shape, so we will be considering replacing some of the planters and redoing some of the landscape that we addressed in our master plan. The general approach is to have a landscape that is more architectural in its repetitive character, that works with the ins and outs and repetition of the building, as well as being a garden that involves more themes from the field of air and space. So that some level of improvement to the terrace is also likely to be part of the project. As for any project that we do that involves changes to the outside in the federal area of Washington, we will be bringing this project to the Commission of Fine Arts and to the National Capital Planning Commission for review. The historic preservation process will be conducted in collaboration with the DC Office of Historic Preservation. And before we come to NCPC for preliminary approval of the project, we will have completed both of these processes, the NEPA and the Section 106. NEPA is stands for the National Environmental Policy Act, a law passed in 1969 that requires federal agencies to consider the impacts of their activities, programs, projects on the environment. The purpose of our project, as Larry has said, is to replace both the exterior envelope and the HVAC and other building systems, as well as most likely the related terrace and vestibule projects. We need this project. The systems have reached the end of their life, and they also aren't as efficient as we would like them to be. Our stormwater does not meet the current DC stormwater requirements for retaining half of a major rainstorm on site. We want to improve that. We want to lower our carbon emissions and save money on energy. We have identified these topics as ones that are potentially impacted by our project. We welcome public comment on any of these they think should not be included, as well as any of the following, as well as any that would not be included. We are not addressing things like endangered species because that's not an issue, or geology or archaeological resources. We will be gathering information on other projects to identify the cumulative impact. This would be things like impacts on transportation and other environmental factors of other projects combined with ours in the same area. We've identified a list of projects. We was suggested by DDOT this morning that we add the north-south trolley project that will be probably routed along 7th Street as an additional project as well. The National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their action on historic properties. As Larry pointed out, the mall is on the list of historic places, and we expect that the National Mall building of Air and Space, when it is 50 years old, may also be listed on that register, and so we treat it as if it is already listed in terms of protecting its historic fabric. For the Section 106 process, we've identified an area of potential effect. This is the area within which we will look at viewscapes and other impacts of the proposed alternatives. We will be standing along different places within this area, photographing our building and rendering the impact of alternatives on those views. The project scope, I'd like Larry to come back and talk a little bit more detail about what we'll be doing.
Thank you, Ann. The three principal project goals are up on this slide. The first is to replace building systems. This is exterior, interior, things like roofs, walls, glazing, and interior systems, mechanical systems and the like, so that we can provide the proper environment for the visitors, the staff, and the artifacts. Singular, most important goal, I think we would all agree. Second is that in doing that, executing those things, that we do it in a way that minimizes carbon emissions and energy consumption. There's a lot of opportunity here to do some pretty remarkable things, especially on the energy consumption side, and I think that we want to take advantage of those opportunities that are presented. And then I just want to emphasize or restate Ann's comment about queuing and security. If you're out there on a hot summer day now, it's a pretty inhospitable experience, especially if the museum is crowded and you need to wait in line for 15 or 20 minutes. And I think there's a strong desire on everybody's, from everybody's perspective to go ahead and improve that experience, so one is comfortable when they enter the museum and they can appreciate and understand the important objects in the collection that are there. And I think that we need to do a better job of how folks get into the building. Project components, it's probably, not probably, it is. The more significant elements, one, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that the Tennessee Pink really doesn't have, the 1.25 inch Tennessee Pink doesn't have a useful life. It's not something that can be repaired or replaced. I'm sorry, it's not something that can be repaired. It's something that needs to be replaced. So one of the project components is a replacement of that material. Again, we'll talk in a minute or two about what some alternatives to that cladding might be. The second is that it's the wholesale replacement of HVAC, fire protection, plumbing and systems, and not quite the wholesale replacement of electrical systems. Again, all those systems present opportunities to make a building that operates more efficiently. The third element is to replace the roofs, the skylights, and the curtain walls. We've talked about protection of objects. Glazing technology has advanced since those glass elements were last touched. We need to do a better job with controlling UV. We need to do a better job with controlling humidification. And the only way to really deliver that is with the replacement of those glazing elements. Ann talked about the building entrance and just trying to find a way to incorporate security and incorporate the whole entry experience into the museum in a little bit nicer way. And then the last is the idea of considering renewable energy alternatives wherever we can. We've got a roof that is pretty significant in size and is never in shade and creates a wonderful opportunity to capture energy. Goals and requirements. The goals, durability is something that's very important to us. You look at the existing building facade that's 40 years old and we're in the business of replacing it. The charge is to find something that lasts a little bit longer, actually a lot of bit longer than the 40 years of that existing stone. So we're looking at an 80 to 100 year time frame on the materials. To provide museum quality ambient conditions. One of the things that happens in the current building because of that lack of humidification, that in the wintertime the objects aren't as protected environment as they should be. Creates significant distress to those, and then of course the importance of aesthetics. We are on the National Mall. It's a building that's visited by 7 to 8 million people a year, and we need to make sure that we're respectful and responsible stewards of the aesthetics. Performance requirements, the things that we have to do. Executive Order 13514 is about reduction in greenhouse gas, 32% by 2020. That is a significant project goal. The project is of a scale that an internal SI requirement is that we need to meet LEED Gold. We have ASHRAE 90.1 and 189.1, which are energy use criteria. We've got different blast rules, and as Ann mentioned earlier, we've got requirements from the District of Columbia Department of Environment on stormwater. All program requirements that were being met. Talked briefly about energy efficient strategies. The first thing we really wanted, that we always try and do, is reduce energy use. And again, because this building was constructed in the mid-'70s and there hasn't been a lot of intervention along the way, there's a long list of things that we can do to reduce the energy usage, and we intend on doing all of those things. Once we reduce the energy, it's how can we provide the energy we need in the most efficient manner. We are looking and seriously considering heat being sourced at the building as opposed to currently we're on GSA central plant, and so it's moving off of that and looking at providing it in the building. We're also looking at the same solution with chilled water. Once we do that and we're getting the energy we need in the most efficient way we can, we then go and say, what can we do about generating energy on site? I talked a little bit about that. The photovoltaics on the roof certainly are a golden opportunity to generate a fair amount of the energy that we require. And then there's also the opportunity for solar thermal. We are in the process of evaluating alternative cladding materials. This is not the exhaustive list. These are 4 that we chose to put up here for different reasons. The rendering on the upper left is the Tennessee pink marble. It's the same that's on the existing building. It's just thicker, and it's installed in a more appropriate way, meeting the industry standards of today. On the upper right is granite, pink granite, which is more durable than the marble. It doesn't need to be quite as thick. The 2 materials on the bottom left are materials that are reflective of the mission of the building. The idea that when man went up in space, there was a tremendous amount of innovation and invention that occurred in new materials that came out of it. So those bottom 2 slides represent materials that are reflective of what actually goes on in the building. Now you're back to Ann.
As we mentioned earlier, other project elements include the vestibules shown here in a diagrammatic way. We're also showing potentially some shaded areas in addition to the enclosed vestibule for those waiting on the mall side of the building. And here is a cross-section through the terraces from our master plan design. This is the face of the building here on the right. Here is the sidewalk down here on the left. And the first terrace planter sits on actual ground, but the other 2 planters shown here are part of the roof of the parking garage below. When the building was designed, that was going to be a public parking garage, but with all of the various security issues that have occurred over the years, it is now limited to Smithsonian vehicles only. The revitalization of the terrace will include themed landscape gardens, as well as rhythms of plantings that reinforce the architectural design. Our next steps following this public scoping meeting today include receipt of continuing to receive comments on scoping items such as the effects on the environment to be looked at, and any comments you have on what you saw tonight. Those will be completed by November 28th. Our team will then be preparing an environmental assessment and reviewing, developing alternatives and analyzing the impacts with respect to those alternatives. That analysis in the form of an EA will be available for public comment. At the same time, we will be doing a Section 106 process with consulting parties. That will include several meetings and will end with a decision document, which we intend to prepare in April. In April, we hope to submit the project to NCPC for approval so that we can proceed with completing construction documents for the project. Opportunities for public comment will be tonight, and you may also send them electronically to Cheryl Kelly at NCPC or via snail mail. There are forms up here if you want to comment on a form.